Some reports say they threw bricks. Other people say stones.
You're having public discourse over, I'm sorry, we can't vote for you. You agree with gay rights.
Yeah, in 2020.
There is a lot of work to do still.
People started getting so angry. They had been pushed so far that they fought back. And it created a true riot, a true revolution.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Social Discord, Episode 8, Queer as History, Part 2. I'm your host, Dalen Turk.
I'm Kara Tebow.
And I'm Curtis Medina.
Now, in the last episode, we covered topics basically starting in kind of the late 1800s, everything that led up to what was, or what became, Stonewall. But before we get into Stonewall, because that's what's coming up next, let's dive into some of the organizations that predated Stonewall that kind of really helped create the movement that has been building up over the 60s, starting with, in 1953, however you pronounce this, the Mattachine Society?
Yeah, that sounds right. Mattachine is a good guess.
This is the one that I talked earlier. It was Henry Harry Hay, who was one of the early starters of the gay rights movement and was also part of the Communist Party, or tried to be at least.
Yeah, and they started basically in 1953. They started the first widely distributed, openly gay magazine or periodical called One Magazine, and it caused a huge stir because the USPS was, as we already talked about, in the business of stopping what they thought was obscene things going through the mail, and they stopped this magazine from going forward, and it actually created a Supreme Court case that the homosexuals basically won.
Wait, that's so insanely unconstitutional. Just stop someone's publication because you don't like it because you're nosy and boring.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I mean, thankfully, as backwards as we often think of people, and at least in this regard, back then, the Supreme Court actually did uphold that there was nothing obscene about just being gay, and that was kind of huge for that time, because it kind of for the first time sort of legitimized how somebody could be gay and sort of be considered normal. It didn't necessarily give free reign to anything or any acts or whatever. They were still being persecuted for that, but the act of just being gay and talking about it was deemed, that is protected under the Constitution.
It's unfortunate, like I said too, with and I don't mean to pry on the fact that he was trying to be a part of the Communist Party, but with McCarthy already pushing that association of homosexuality with the Communist Party, I wonder what damage it really did in the public's perception of homosexuality with, actually having a leader who was a part of the Communist Party. Like I said, ultimately he was kicked out of his own organization because of his views. But I guess I could read more into it, but I'm very curious as to what that really did to the public perception of that group.
Yeah, I mean, it was all bad. I think the other person that
quite honestly, it's a good summary. It was all bad.
the other person that was I forget his name, but who was the co-founder of the One Magazine that ended up taking it over, I believe, or at least, of the Mattachine organization. I'm not sure if it was the One Magazine went with it, but who ended up taking over the Mattachine organization or whatever. Basically, was saying I believe in the letting gay people congregate idea, but I don't necessarily believe in all these other political things, and that's why they forced them out. So I think they perceived right away that was going to be an argument they didn't want to include.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess compared to the next group that we're about to go over, they what are they? It's the
I don't know how to say it. Daughters.
I was going to say the Mattachine Society was more focused on the social aspect of the queer community rather than political. And then as we're going into the Daughters of Bilitis, they were more focused on the political side of the queer community rather than the social.
Well, and it actually started as a social group, but pretty quick with just 8 members, and pretty quickly it actually started focusing on lesbian rights, and
Yep.
and that's really important to mention because a lot of times you only hear about the men, and they made a lot of the big headlines or whatever, but women were just as oppressed, if not more. For who they loved, and so this was an organization that fought for them. And one of the reasons actually for that was I think it was in the UK. I read that during this time, they had sodomy laws, so it was illegal for men to have sex with men, but actually was not illegal for women to have sex with women. And they said that they didn't make a law against it because they couldn't imagine it, is how they put it. And so they were still shamed as bad, if not worse. They still had all of the same things, but at least in the UK, they were not necessarily as scrutinized legally, or at least not caught as often.
It's interesting too, because especially within U.S. law, at this time, the term sodomy was so broadened to basically cover like all of the actions of the queer community that people pressing them just didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, and it went direct. I mean, the word sodomy is from the Bible, I mean, it went back to all these ideas that they thought that was, so wrong or whatever, and so they wouldn't even consider like how that could be part of a healthy sexual relationship. And so now we get to Stonewall. If you notice, if you're a gay person listening to this, like, I hope you super appreciate that it took us all this time to get to Stonewall, because most of the time, this is where people start. And if you're a gay person, you probably have heard of Stonewall. You probably didn't hear any of the other stuff before this. And so the fact that we're getting this now, it hopefully give you a lot of like background. Stonewall basically was a riot that actually sparked the Pride celebrations. It's the reason that Pride happens in June, which is something I just learned not too long ago. So? I thought it was just a random month.
Yeah. Let's pick June.
Yeah, June seems nice. June is my busy month that I work, and I have a friend of mine that helps me who's also gay, and a lot of times they don't want to be at work for like about a week because of Pride parades, and so I always let them off or whatever so they can do that. But I remember one time saying, why can't they just do Pride in a different month in every city or whatever, like in December, November, January, who wants, let's just do it in January, we're not in the busiest time of year or whatever. And I was just so ignorant because I didn't understand that there was actual meaning of why most Pride celebrations are done in June. June 28th, 1969, the Stonewall Inn, which actually wasn't a hotel, it just was called Stonewall Inn for some reason, was this really seedy gay bar in New York City's Greenwich Village.
Yep.
It was raided by police several times, actually, but this was, I think, the second time in like a week or something that it had been raided, and it caused a riot that nearly 400 people joined in on and resumed on succeeding nights, and it basically inspired the idea of fighting back and being prideful over your sexuality or being of the queer community.
I would like to point out too, because there's so many, especially with Stonewall, there are so many myths. No one, who threw the first brick, who did this, who did that. There's so many different ideas of how this happens, and a part of that is that, the Stonewall Inn is this kind of extravagant, really nice bar that they accepted as their home and they hang out at. But like you said, it was this kind of really seedy place, and like so many gay bars in New York, it was run either, through the Mafia by their ownership or just by their control.
Yeah, the Mafia, they saw this as a way of making some really good, easy money. Just like when you banned alcohol during Prohibition, they saw this as a way to make money off of something that was illegal. And in a lot of cases, they probably were sort of indifferent or maybe even against homosexuality themselves, but they saw it as a purely capitalistic, endeavor to basically give protection to these these bars, and they actually would even bribe local police officers to look the other way and just let these people like congregate in gay bars. The Stonewall itself actually was operating without a liquor license, which was the main reason was given for raiding it. But actually, the bigger reason was because the police wanted to crack down on the mob, and so like, you know, so I think there's a narrative that, you know, police were just were just homophobic, you know, but that wasn't necessarily true. They may have been, but they also were legitimately trying to shut down something they saw to be a very dangerous way of funding other illegal activity with the mob.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, you know, with these gay bars as a quote unquote, you know, safe place for the queer community, they participated in that, you know, in the face of laws of, you know, where people were being arrested for indecency, for literally just showing too much affection to someone of the same sex or dressing in, you know, non-heteronormative ways. And it was like these safe places were kind of an excuse for cops to go in and be like, hey, let's make these arrests.
Yeah, I mean, and they could do it whenever they wanted. It was kind of the sad part, you know. It's like there were a lot of cops that were on the payroll of the mob that would look the other way, and so you kind of felt safe. But you also knew that, like, at any moment the cops would come in and be like, you know, just kidding, you're actually arrested. You know, it's just like that scene in Casablanca or whatever, where they, you know, they say, you know, I'm shocked to see this is you know, this is a casino, and this is the guy that's been being paid off that he absolutely knows is a casino. You know, it's like, you know, it's just like that. You know, it's this real double standard of like kind of trying to deal with it, but at the same time officially not being able to say that it's okay. And one of the really interesting little tidbits that I think get lost in a lot of the stories that I actually read in one of the books I read to research this, was that they didn't have a liquor license on purpose because they didn't want to be able to be shut down as a bar. And so instead of doing that, they actually made themselves a club, a members only club, that just happened to serve liquor. And the club had like a entry fee that you'd have to pay. That just happened to be probably about the, you know, amount of money you'd pay to buy a drink, and so they actually got around a lot of these laws that would have prevented them from even opening to begin with, because they were a club and they weren't necessarily you know, able to be restricted like they would be of a bar for being indecent. But still, the police, when they wanted to, they would take you know, this as a reason to say, oh no, you're not actually a bar. And therefore we can shut you down and we can arrest all your people and all this stuff. Story goes, 9 policemen entered Stonewall Inn. They arrested the employees for selling alcohol without a license. They roughed up the patrons, which was totally normal back then and probably still now. You know, they cleared the bar, and they kind of just sent a lot of people on their way. But they actually happened to they happened to sort of pick on some people who were not wearing gender appropriate clothing, is how they put it.
Yep. In New York, it was a crime to quote unquote, you know, masquerade as a member of the opposite sex.
Based on which marketing campaign?
Right, exactly.
It's absolutely bonkers.
So ultimately, they were targeting drag queens and cross-dressing patrons who were in the bar at the time, along with the employees.
I will say, too, it blows my mind in a place like America, which, you know, we have the Constitution, which is supposed to protect our free speech and this and that it was a crime until very recently. Our parents were born at this time to wear certain clothing in America, where we're supposed to be very free. That's insane. Like, that is insane to me. It's shameful. It's very embarrassing. It's such a stain on our history. It really is.
And it's the same, like I said, looking at the American frontier, they fit women dressing as men into the narrative. They made it fit into the narrative of the American frontier. But the narrative of men cross-dressing as women was just completely pushed on the edges and just tried to get it out of the narrative as much as possible. And so you get situations like these, where it was just so scrutinized and so looked down upon that it was literally made illegal. And I don't know if there was an equal amount of scrutiny that women cross-dressing as men came under at this time as the same as men cross-dressing as women.
Yeah,
Was there?
Yeah, you couldn't wear pants, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's exactly like this year. I think it was actually a little earlier. I think by this point, women wearing pants was a little more accepted.
Right.
But say like the 30s, 40s, women were beat up. For wearing pants. They were looked down upon. They were, people would they would jeer them. They would call them men. They would call them by masculine names and things like that. I mean, it was awful. It was absolutely bully tactics.
You look at the year during World War II where women took over baseball, and you look at the movie A League of Their Own, and their uniforms had skirts.
It makes you wonder what in 50, 60 years we're going to look back on and be absolutely mortified that we're like, how did we do that? So hey, be on the right side of history, Kay, because this is insane.
I mean,
sorry, I just had to point out how insane that is to
even
me.
in modern times, you look at and even at the time there was the the burn the bra movement, and now you have the free the nipple movement happening right now. And it like everyone's got nipples. Who cares?
Just mind your damn business. Like I don't understand. Let people do what they want to do. It sounds so exhausting to be so bothered by what other people are doing.
I know. It's like how exhausting does it have to be constantly just bothered and concerned by what everybody wears?
I want that free time so bad.
I would say you have too much time in your hands.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like I'm so jealous about how much free they cared about someone's sex life. Like I need that free time. Like I need that vacation time. But whatever.
But you'll spend it more wisely.
Oh yeah, no, I'm going to the pervert bar or whatever they called it. Like this sounds way more fun.
Oh yeah, the sexual psychopath or whatever.
I'm that's where my free time's going. Anyway, sorry, Curtis. So continue.
No worries. No, it's 1969 June, and accounts vary really wildly about who did this. But a lot of people believe that it was a woman that was a lesbian activist. It was definitely a woman. Or I should say this differently. It was definitely somebody who was feminine but dressed masculine, I think is probably the best way to put it. So we're going to be talking about this idea of gender and trans in the next episode. Definitely somebody like that. Somebody possibly named Storme how do you say that? Laramie. They yell, and this is not on your notes, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned it.
Storme Delarverie.
Storme Delarverie.
Yeah. they were supposed to have yelled, quote, "Why don't you do something?" as they were being jostled, pushed into the paddy wagon, which is what they called them back then, which was basically just a moving jail in a car. And they said, "Why don't you do something?" And apparently people did something. People started getting really angry. They started throwing bottles. Some reports say they threw bricks. Other people say stones. They were calling the police things like coppers and throwing copper pennies at them. And essentially, like, why this was significant, like even if you take away all of the queer aspect of this, was sort of the first like major riot that happened in America that police kind of lost. Like, they like it wasn't like today where like, the police just overwhelmed the crowd or whatever. These were 9 police people that were used to very, timid reactions.
Oh yeah, very passive
to when they arrested these people, like very innocent reactions and here, people started getting so angry. They had been pushed so far that they fought back, and it created a true riot, a true revolution. It's why it's a huge moment in gay history. And one of the funny things is the police were so overwhelmed, they actually barricaded themselves in the bar
because they weren't prepared for it.
Yeah, not at all. And so they were trapped in a bar with hundreds of people outside, yelling, trying to get in, all these different things. There was a reporter from the local neighborhood newspaper called the Village Voice that actually went in there with them, and the reporter said that they actually were for the protest, but they wanted to be on the inside or something like that. And so they wrote a story later on that was from sort of the perspective of being stuck inside there. And so they called for backup, and backup did eventually come. But this is sort of a rumor aspect of it that I heard in this book, that it took a while for the backup to come because these police had not told the local jurisdiction of this raid because they were worried that somebody was on the payroll and would warn them.
Yeah, they're trying to stop a leak.
Yeah.
avoid a leak.
Well, that's what you get
Yeah.
for being jerks.
Yeah, and so nobody came to help them for the longest time. It actually enabled the crowd to get to a size that was out of control. Eventually, they did break it up, or people sort of left or whatever. But it was so embarrassing that these people that you consider to be like lesser than you or sissies or whatever were able to stand up to the police and the very next day they actually reopened the bar, even though they actually weren't able to serve liquor because they had broken all their liquor bottles when the police raided it. They weren't able to serve liquor, but they actually reopened it the next night, and more protests happened and continued for the next few days. And the newspaper, the Village Voice, that reported on it, that reporter that was inside, they were one of the only newspapers to actually write about this event. Unfortunately, they used some terrible language that was sort of making fun of it, not really treating it seriously. Very offensive things, including quote.
At the time, there were so many people that didn't take the movement seriously because they didn't.
Not at all.
They didn't take these people's feelings seriously.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, they use terms like the forces of faggotry to describe the protesters. Other newspapers use words like homo nest raided, queen bees are stinging mad. Like all these things, and this got the people so much even more angry that they were either being ignored or they were being made fun of. That this actually spawned a second riot outside of the Village Voice's location in New York, where people were thinking about burning the building down. They didn't, but they were threatening to. And so I mean, it just shows you exactly how mad they were. This news, though, of standing up to the police actually spread across the land through word of mouth mostly, and it actually inspired other people to do protests and riots in a few other cities, and it even inspired the first gay pride parade in 1970, which was the first. It was June 28th, 1970, was the first anniversary of that raid, and several cities actually took part in this, or I guess I should say the city didn't necessarily like it, but they did it in many cities, and the thing that choked me up when I was reading about it was it said that the one in New York, that several people began marching up on 6th Avenue towards Central Park, and supporters that were watching the parade from the sidelines, not all of which were actually necessarily gay, joined the procession, and it eventually stretched 15 city blocks, encompassing thousands of people that were fed up with this.
It's interesting, and I think one thing that really... one reason why Stonewall was so separated from the previous events that we were discussing is that, and I don't want to say those were isolated incidents because they weren't. They were part of a bigger picture, but they were separated within themselves. And what Stonewall did really, it brought the movement to, just nationwide attention. And it created this, movement that's still going strong today. And literally in 2019, the man who led the raid at Stonewall, he was the police commissioner in New York, James O'Neill. 50 years later, he stood up and he apologized, and he, agreed that the actions they took at that time, then the discrimination and the laws that they were enforcing was not right, and that it was oppressive, and he apologized for it. And so that's the lasting effect that Stonewall and these, many other instances have had up until today even.
Yeah, I mean, if the police officer that led that, can have that big of a change, in his lifetime, I think that's a really great sign that a lot of people who, maybe started their lives being super homophobic or at least not understanding what it was can actually change over time. And it's really moving that, that he would give that apology.
Granted,
because a lot of people would have. Yeah, I mean, I think it was that's when he officially said it, but but I think there was a lot of doubt even when it happened.
Right.
about like, oh wow, like this is creating a big thing. You know, maybe this wasn't just about us roughing up a couple of people. Maybe this was a bigger deal. Maybe this is a systematic problem. You know, and one thing that I wanted to point out, and I'm not sure if this is controversial or not, based on the data, one of the sectors of population that is usually most against homosexuals, just, I mean, you name it, marriage and all kinds of different things, just even, you know, just being around, is usually the African American population.
Mm-hmm.
By percentage, they are the most against the laws that protect gay people. They're more, and usually it's because of religious beliefs. Black people tend to be one of the most religious sectors of the American population today. I've personally been in a Black church that actually was talking about converting someone who had just come out of the closet, and to convince them that it was wrong. And they were, and it was really scary because they were actually going to surprise this person. The person wasn't there. They were talking about at a future meeting doing this and surprising them, and sort of like having a, what's the word?
Which I'm sure they see as mercy. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Which is why it's such a heartbreaking topic to talk about.
So it's not to say that all Black people are against gay people. I'm not trying to say that at all. And thankfully, over the last couple of decades, it's really changing pretty quickly. Especially when, like, I think Obama spoke about gay rights quite a bit, and that really made a big difference with the Black community. So I'm not trying to say they all are, but
there was an article, and I can't remember what it was, but surveys were taken after and I guess during the Obama administration. I don't know what the percentage was, but acceptance and approval of, gay rights in the Black community had risen to 59%.
Yeah, it was a huge shift.
And and I can't remember what the number was for the Latin community. I know it was the highest. I think it was like 60%, something like that. But then in the white community, approval was at 50% still.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what made this come to mind is that, like, if you're a Black person listening to this, one of the things I think it would be really great if you took away from this history is that the queer riots and the revolution and gay rights could not have happened if they had not been inspired by the civil rights movement that protected African Americans' equality. And by the same token, it also could not have happened if if women hadn't fought for their rights as well, with the feminist movements. It's strange to me that somebody who's Black could, be so for civil rights and against gay rights, as if it's something different, because it was so inspired. It could not have happened without it, and like it's all connected. And so, like, I really hope that, like, that makes a difference in somebody's life, because I didn't really realize that until I started researching it.
I have several Black friends who are gay, and the hardest thing for them is definitely, it's very cultural. There's a lot of pride in your heritage and masculinity, and that was very difficult for them to navigate. So it's very rooted in the pride of a lot of different cultures, and the masculinity and things like that, and it's hard to stray away from. But yeah, like I said, Chris, I think and I hope that's getting better, because that was a huge struggle for my friends, to be seen as not manly anymore in their churches or their culture. But I think fortunately that's shifting a lot. But we have to remember, where people are coming from. And if you're taught that growing up, then chances are you're going to, believe that for quite a bit as well. So
I was talking to somebody about the Democratic Party in South Carolina. South Carolina is one of the reddest states in the country. I spend a lot of time there, so that's why it's on my mind. And I was talking to he's in the Democratic Party, and basically, and he's gay, and basically was saying that he was so disappointed because the Democrats in South Carolina didn't think that they could win if they ran somebody who even spoke positively about gay movements. Like, they basically just had to avoid the subject. Wow. or be, and this has happened in several cases of Democrats that mostly have lost, or completely be against it. Actually say religiously they don't think it's right or whatever. And they always kind of, tiptoe around the terms, not to piss off like too many of the Democrats or whatever, but essentially they're not fighting for it, or they're even talking against it. And that is what goes for Democratic leadership in South Carolina, and particularly with Black candidates. They feel like if they say they're okay with gay people, that it somehow is going to take away their religious voters, and they might be right. Most of the it is a little bit of a losing statement to fight for that, for the gay minority, but it's really sad at the same time. There has to be a way to represent everyone equally.
It's important too I think, like, when Dalen and I, we live in Austin, and it's very insulated, and it's easy to think that the whole world's a nice liberal paradise where, gay people are seemingly, at least on the surface, accepted and things like that. And it's a good reminder too, especially if you want to be a good ally, or, if you have the privilege of being gay and living in an area that accepts that, that's just not the case around the whole country. Like you just said, Curtis, like this is still like they're having public discourse over, I'm sorry, we can't vote for you. You agree with gay rights.
Yeah, in 2020.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There is a lot of work to do still. We cannot forget that, because there's still people in places like South Carolina who are relying on the rest of us to help and to continue that work that needs to happen.
And I want to touch back real quick on the combination of the gay rights movement and the civil rights movement. And really, the queer community has been entrenched with the Black community for so long now. And it's, as much as we say that, it's not very accepted in the Black community, it's something that, has been a part of it. And, looking back in the 1920s at the Harlem Renaissance, it was this huge just explosion of art and culture and expression in the Black community, that queer people in the Black community could finally express themselves and be who they were. And part of that was because, there was this, common understanding of, oppression that they were all under. But even then, you look at men like Bayard Rustin, who is openly gay, and he's the one who, along with Martin Luther King and A. Philip Randolph, really constructed the March on Washington. And so I don't think people really get a grasp of how entrenched these two movements were, just because, the civil rights, obviously, it's kind of it is the biggest, movement against oppression that the country's ever seen. And it kind of gets overshadowed, but, I don't think people really see how involved and how entrenched these two movements truly were at the time and still are.
Especially if you're African American and queer.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. There is, the statistics are overwhelming in terms of violence, specifically against Black trans women. They are overwhelmingly targeted and hunted. Again, it's 2020, and yet there's still a lot of work to do, especially for minority people to be able to be openly gay.
I feel like that's a scary word, and I'm sure it is scary, but what exactly do you mean by, in modern day terms, where they're hunted?
Well, I feel like, to use President Trump's favorite word, it's a witch hunt. But people, I can go about my life for the most part as a straight white female, and, whatever, people can be dicks to me, but people don't hate me because I'm trans. They don't hate me because I'm Black. I'm not terrified to go to, I'm a woman, so it's a little scary sometimes, but Jesus Christ, if I'm a Black trans woman, I have to be worried about being beaten up on the street because people hate me.
Out, basically.
Yeah. And so that's what I maybe hunted as a little aggressive, but it probably feels that way to somebody who's just trying to enjoy their time in a bar and they're being beaten up because they just make someone uncomfortable because they're different than them. It's horrible.
It's interesting because on the other side of that, there are times where I feel it as a stereotype, and I say this and you guys laughed at me the other day.
I was just about to say, be careful, Dalen.
How I'm kind of the stereotypical straight white man. I'm this tall, big, white dude. But there's also kind of a guilt that comes with it, where I'm I feel guilty that I can just live my life and basically do whatever I want. And there are people who, out of things that they have no control over, have their lives under constant fear and scrutiny and just, oppression.
And that's why we need straight white men who are very protected to help and to speak up, and to do things like hopefully educate and help and be an ally and to go where they're needed, because they're pretty protected.
And the reason that I laughed last time you said that, Dalen, was you said you were boring. You said you were you're boring, straight, white man. And I said, don't call yourself boring. Like I mean, you're interesting. Like it, just because you're not of this like community or whatever doesn't make you boring. It's fine. You're straight, cool.
Good for you.
But like I didn't want to self-deprecate that.
No, for sure.
And I mean, I've been. I can't. I'm not. I'm not of color. I mean, I'm Spanish, but I'm not black, and I'm not a trans person. But I have hung out with some people who are, and I got the feeling that they get when they're walking down the street in full. It's in this case they were a drag queen, but like in full drag and down the most dangerous part of San Francisco. Like I was walking with them, and I got that feeling. But the other takeaway I got that day, and this is actually before I knew I was gay, was I have never felt safer in my life as when I was walking next to a trans drag woman that was 6.5 feet tall with their spiky heels and tough muscly attitude. I have never felt more safe because they knew that they were being that they would be looked at differently, that they could be targeted, and they decided to instead of being fearful, that they would walk proudly, they would walk with a strength, and they would and I really believe that had somebody said something, some kind of slur or something, like that high heel would have went through their eye, I mean, I have no doubt in the world that messing with this person would have been a major mistake on anyone's part, so I mean, even at the time I didn't know I was gay, but I still respected that so much.
Yeah.
Right.
That is such an incredible form of strength to do that. Yeah. Major props.
Speaking of, this is going to be a great segue. Speaking of forms of strength, we're going to move on to talking about the symbolic flag that is the rainbow flag how it came to be. So in 1978, there was a San Francisco artist named Gilbert Baker who was openly gay and a drag queen as well. And it at the time, I don't think it was known really, but it was revealed later on that he was actually urged by Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay elected official in the U.S. I believe he was elected to the San Francisco City Council, right?
I think it was the first. I'm not sure if he was the first, but it was one of the highest jobs that had ever been given to an openly gay person.
But up until this point, we had this movement going, and we had all these protests and these riots, but there really wasn't something that stood for the movement. There wasn't this symbol, and Baker was, I'm trying to read here. So Baker chose, and they were trying to decide what to have as a symbol for the gay rights movement, and he ultimately chose a flag because, as Baker is quoted in saying, a flag that he saw is the most powerful symbol of pride for countries, for cities, for organizations. The flag is an exact powerful symbol of what they take pride in their movement, and what they're fighting for. And he chose the rainbow flag because, just as guys like Alfred Kinsey really stressed in sexuality and gender, that it's so intensely diverse. Just like everyone has their different personality, there's so many different aspects of gender and sexuality that it's just such a diverse thing. And so he chose the rainbow colors to represent the diversity that's within the movement. And it also was a representation of the prisms, basically like a prism where if you shine one light through a prism, you see all the different colors that make that up. And it also happens to be why a rainbow forms naturally. In that a rainbow is not complete without all of its different colors and all all of these different shades basically. And so so it was meant to basically be kind of say like this encompasses everyone. And so initially they even wanted to
like certain colors meant certain
Right.
certain types of people. That is, I think that's sort of kind of dying out in my opinion, more
Even then,
lately,
because that in
because there's so
itself,
many different types of people
I was
now.
gonna say, and that in itself is like imply, and I guess it's not, but it's maybe not directly, but it's implying exclusivity. Like this color means this thing, but when you look at the
Exactly.
rainbow, it represents this entire spectrum. Like you said, the light spectrum. When there's how many trillions of colors on the light spectrum that we just can't see. There's so many different strands of sexuality and gender that you can't just compact it to these simple things.
And what a beautiful metaphor it is.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
it really holds up over time. I mean, it's one of those, the best things are always the simplest ideas, and so like, you wouldn't necessarily think that a stripe of, was it, how many different colors? 1, 2, 3,
I
4,
believe
5,
it was
6 colors.
it started out as 8 and then they
They had a printing error or something.
Yeah,
Like it was
and then
one of those like drunk
they-
history type, like
they
just
cut
like
it down
random,
to
like
6.
yeah, like just like one of those like drunk history random type of like
Oh, yeah.
things that just happen that change your life because somebody ran out of a certain color or something.
We ran out of the indigo thread. Like,
Yeah. But yeah, it was just like that, where basically they had to reduce it to it or whatever, so it kind of became a symbol versus maybe not the literal, like there are this many types of people or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's been such a long lasting, symbol of peace and everything. I was recently in Laramie, Wyoming.
boy.
And yeah, and if you don't know it, that is Laramie, Wyoming is actually known for one of the worst, crimes against a gay person that sparked like a whole, outrage. Matthew, I think it's Matthew Shepard, was a 21-year-old college kid that was at least initial reports said that he was killed or tied to a post, beaten, and eventually died because he was gay, and he came on to these two other guys who were intending to rob him, I believe. And so there's a little bit of like, they kind of went back and forth a little bit about whether or not it was because he was gay, but he was gay, and they picked on him. And anyway, but the reason I mentioned Laramie though is it was really cool though, because I happened to be there in June, and there were so many gay flags flying in downtown Laramie, Wyoming, which is the last place I was expecting to see, that kind of support. And it just, I don't know, and maybe especially because they're somewhat known for having this terrible thing that happened in history. It was just so nice to see that.
Do y'all remember some of your first instances of seeing the rainbow flag?
Well, I'm from Portland,
Yeah.
Oregon, so yeah.
That's fair. Yeah.
My story is no more interesting. It was the first like high school trip I made with friends. I was probably about 18, and we went to San Francisco. So I mean, duh, it was there.
Yeah, I don't think I really, and maybe it was just me not paying attention. But as Missoula, Montana, still being a relatively secluded place, even though it is the liberal college town of Montana, I don't think I really saw rainbow flags until like the second term of Obama's presidency.
Wow.
It's awesome how much more, I would say, it's normalized. We see it a lot more now, and it's just the fact that we all know what it is awesome. Like
Yes.
it's not a secret or anything like that. And I was actually in the Gay Straight Alliance Club in high school, and I was Mormon growing up, and oh gosh, having like any like any references to that like around my church people, it was like, so do you just like wear rainbow stuff all the time? And I'm like, nope, that's not how it works. But
seeing the gay flags flying in so many different businesses in Laramie in support of Pride Month, that it's a constant reminder to me not to think of a certain state or a certain type of people as thinking one way or the other. Like, that like the fact that this surprised me in such a delightful way was like really meaningful. And it kind of goes right back to like what we were talking about of like the whole reason to have a flag to feel prideful. It's like seeing that in such an unusual place I wasn't expecting it, gave me such a great feeling of like, wow, like how far we've come, that, that 50 years after Stonewall and after all the things that happened before it, that we can fly a pride flag in the middle of a very conservative city and a very conservative state, that, and it's okay. It's not politicized. It's not, Republicans versus Democrats or any of this stuff. Like, it actually has a bigger meaning of, like, maybe it's time to get over this.
You can only hope and just keep working together. And you see so many colleges, and you see so many local communities, and you see so many organizations that really grasp onto this idea in a way that we really haven't seen before. I know even the company that Kara works for, Tailgate Guys, their owners, Teal Capital, when they bought out Tailgate Guys, they sent out these community newsletters to everyone in the company saying, hey, we're going to discuss these racial injustices. We're going to discuss equality. We're going to discuss gay rights. And you see that more and more nowadays, where, people are hopping on the bandwagon, and rightfully so. And, granted, like I said, it took, 50 years for that police officer to apologize. But, look where we're at now with everybody.
And I think as we continue to move forward with that, it is so important to remember that there have been so many people who paved the way for these conversations to happen, but there's still so much more to do. Like we've talked about, there's still so much more to do in terms of helping people feel accepted, helping them be safe, letting people we may have laws that prevent you from firing someone for being gay, but we also have laws that allow employees to fire people for whatever. So maybe you didn't get fired because you were gay, but you got fired because you didn't put the rug back in place. There's still a lot of ways that there's so much discrimination out there. So it's not over yet. And got to keep fighting the good fight.
All right. And that will do it for Queer as History Part 2. Curtis, can you tell us a little bit about what we're going into in the next episode, the third part of Queer as History?
Yeah, it's going to be probably the most exciting episode of our 3-part Queer as History series. It's where we take everything that we know about everything that led up to Stonewall, to the riots, and we're going to expand it from that point onward to modern day of basically the origin of Pride, how it became the Pride movement that we know of now. It's going to be really interesting. We're going to talk about the court cases that have been pivotal in the Supreme Court for queer rights ever since then, and kind of how that changed society and eventually nudged the American public to start supporting queer rights.
Along with that, we're going to be talking about some of the notable figures in queer rights history that really led the charge into equal rights for the queer community. But with that being said, I don't think there's anything more to add. Kara, do you want anything to add at the end of this?
No, we decided to talk about the history that you didn't learn in school that you should have.
That's a good way to put it. All right, folks, stick around for the next episode. We're going to cover some super fun court cases and some people that made this happen. So we'll talk to y'all next time. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for listening to Social Discord, part of the Podcast Without Borders Network. You can get a hold of us by sending us an email at pwbnetwork@gmail.com. You can also check out our website at podcastwithoutborders.com. Thanks for listening.